Hey, this is Tony Boss Bolin coming to you from the Lincoln Addict Podcast.
Hey, it's Jason ODB, the Lincoln Addict, hitting you with another episode of Lincoln Addict Podcast. And this is episode lucky number 23. It might be the shortest span in between two episodes. I continue to hear people say, hey, we want more content, so that's what I'm giving you guys via YouTube and, of course, through here via podcasting. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Of course, as I mentioned, YouTube as well. So this episode is a fun one. I'm going to keep the intro a little bit shorter than normal, and that's because I have a guy named Skip who also has the nickname Skagg. He's a really cool dude, and he has a YouTube channel. We'll talk about that. He has a killer 70s custom Lincoln with suicide rear doors. You won't believe who actually kind of the umbrella of who owned this car in the past. We'll, of course, talk about that and so much more about his channel and his Lincoln Continental on this episode. Now, I do want to thank our key partners and sponsors, including Devious Customs. Don't forget, you can follow Devious Customs, just how it sounds, on Instagram and Facebook. They make the best airbag kit on the market for these 60 Lincoln Continentals. But, oh, by the way, they also make other products that, even if you're not looking to highly customize your car, maybe you want to upgrade the window switches and things like that, he makes a modern alternative version that is period correct in terms of the look, and that would save you potentially a lot of money. He makes all kinds of cool stuff too, door panels, speaker boxes, things like that. But deviouscustoms.com, let them know that Lincoln Addict Podcast sent you. Also have to thank Colorado Custom Wheels. You all often hear me talk about Colorado Custom. You can go to coloradocustom.com and you can look at the different wheels that they offer. They were the first to make any sort of Lincoln replica wheel, and the wheel looks very much like the hubcap. However, it's one billet wheel, and the cool thing about that is you won't be losing your hubcaps flying off, plus they look period correct. So, with that being said, let's jump into this episode. Now, the previous episode recap, on episode 22, I pretty much handled that episode. I talked about Roy Rogers' Lincoln and the details that I had uncovered on this storied, vehicle that he owned for so long. If you haven't had an opportunity, go back and follow us via however you're listening to this podcast. Now on YouTube, I think there was a break at some point, and the episodes, for whatever reason, even though I had it logged in, they weren't batching to YouTube. So if you're there listening, just know if you've got an iPhone, you can go into the Apple pre-installed podcast app, and what that allows you to do is search Lincoln Addict, and then you can follow and or subscribe, whatever the word is they use now, to the podcast. It's free, and then you can go back and listen to those other episodes, which is very cool. If you're on an Android device, download Podbean. You should be able to find it if you're a Spotify, user, things like that. I've tried to go back and upload or link it out to all of the different platforms, and I'll kind of double check on that soon because, again, most of us listen to podcasts in a certain spot, like Pandora, Spotify, you name it, and I try to do my best to have it, branch out to all of those, different places. But there's 22 episodes prior to this, and I do try to give a lot of help as much as I can, through the podcast and things I've learned and things like that. The promo that I would say is the lincolnforum.net. They recently, it looks like they did like some sort of back-end update, so they've updated kind of the forum, and as I've said before, forums have kind of really slowed down in the natural sense of the word forum because of social media. You have places like Facebook that have put a lot of enhancements into the groups. So now you can search a group and things like that. So, like for instance, our Lincoln Addict group on Facebook, if you join that, there's discussions in there. There's people posting tips, asking questions. Although I would encourage you to go on the lincolnforum.net because there's a search box there. And if you're having some sort of weird challenge with your car, like I've had in the past, you can kind of search certain keywords. And I'm telling you, if you just spend a few minutes, you'll find people that have had similar things. And an example of that is a couple years back, I guess, I was driving my 64 Lincoln, and the dash was getting so hot, like over towards where the AC controls were at, and you could almost feel heat coming out. And actually, you could. I mean, it was crazy hot. And I went in there and I spent like 5 minutes and I searched, and I found, people said, hey, this one part, it gets basically rusted out inside and it gets stuck, and then it's like basically keeping your heater on. So, it was something weird. I only found 1 or 2 posts about it, but I just used a couple keywords and I went right to the issue. And I knew right away I had to go to Lincoln Land, buy the part. It wasn't too expensive, and then swap that out whenever I was doing the engine bay and the engine and all that stuff on my car. I was able to remedy that issue. But the previous episode recap is brought to you by the fine folks at Griot's Garage. We recently had Nick Griot on, and it's Griots Garage. The cool thing about Griot's Garage is their motto is have fun in your garage. And if you look at the wax and detail, polish and wax, buffer and pads, garage and more, all of these different sections, they have a ton of accessories. I recently went out and bought, for anyone that's my age or older, you'll know, back in the day, you had the California Duster. My dad had that thing, and that thing worked great. And I recently looked into buying another one, and everybody was saying their product had pretty much went into the ground, and it wasn't worth what they were selling it for. So I had went to a local place, and I picked up one of the similar products that Griot's Garage offers, and that's cool because where my car sits right now, I haven't had an opportunity to buy or have a cover made for it. So sometimes it will get that dust and things like that on the car, and then I'm able to take that little duster and get all of that sediment off the top. Now, I've recently kind of bought into a bunch of other products, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to be doing videos and things like that showing me being a novice, right? I mean, I don't know anything about really detailing other than washing and drying a car. I'll be doing videos on YouTube and things like that as well, just to kind of show maybe some beginners that, hey, it's not as hard as, maybe we think that it is. So very cool. But again, wash buckets, polish and wax, all sorts of kits. GRIOTS, GriotsGarage.com. All right, so on this episode, I kind of mentioned it. What is cool is with Skagg, I met him through social media. So we'll talk about his YouTube channel, and I think the cool thing about what he does is he's got the passion for cars. He wasn't able to really end up finding a 60s Lincoln, which is kind of really what you'll hear him talk about a little bit. But he landed with something cool still. And I think the 70s Lincolns are very underrated. I had a buddy in high school that I recently reconnected with, I think last year in October, and he had an 80s Lincoln. And those, I've never really been too big of a fan of some of those style Lincolns, right? But it's funny how when time goes by, things start to become nostalgic, right? So like in the truck world, the OBS trucks, which are like the 88 to 98 trucks, are like all the rage. Now, I've always liked those trucks, but time goes by and like something that you maybe didn't like as much, like is like, oh yeah, that was cool, because you haven't seen one in a while. Well, that's the thing to me about the 70s Lincolns, although they're huge boats and I see them in movies and TV shows all the time and things of that. It's awesome to me to see someone like him that's got a customized one, and we'll talk more about it. But I'm going to kind of finish these segments up, and then we'll jump into that audio. And I want to thank Steel Rubber. As we talk about this episode and what's going to be going down, I would remind folks to go to Steel, STEELE, rubber.com, and check out the automotive search. You can pick the year, make, model, and style vehicle. So, for instance, you pick a 64, 65 Lincoln, whatever your year is, and it's going to show you all of the products available. Now, when you add everything up, it's not super cheap, right? It's a big chunk of money, but remember, these cars are an investment. So you want to make sure that water and wind noise are not getting inside inside these cars, especially if you've got a convertible. You want to make sure that there's a good seal, and even with the sedans, you want to make sure that there's no water getting in around that deck lid. SteelRubber.com, they'll take care of you. Let them know that our Lifestyle Podcast sent you. So Lincoln Life updates, really what I wanted to kind of share here is I have continued to book more wedding rentals. via word of mouth and through the Haggerty Drive Share website, which is a cool thing that they've kind of started. Of course, that's a place that you'll see in different parts of the country. I mean, all kinds of different cars, from Mustangs to Broncos, you name it. The cool thing about what I'm doing is I'm not necessarily saying, hey, here's the keys to my car, you can go drive it. That's not what I do. I only do like chauffeured rides and things like that, or photo shoots, and that allows for me to, of course, always be in command of the car and not just allowing anybody to go out there and drive it. So more on that. I'll continue to post photos. Of course, I've got several Instagram pages. I've got Lincoln Addict. I've got Lincoln Continental Sales, which I have been trying to post more on. And then I have Classic Lincoln Rentals, which is the name of the business. And if you're in the Tampa Bay area, or you know someone with a wedding or something to that effect, maybe even just photos for the holidays, you can book the car on driveshare.com. And more to come on that. Now, something else from a Lincoln Life standpoint, I'm going to be going out to California in September. So I'm looking forward to the Ratties Rat Fest is what they call it. And Tony Boss Bolin and his girl, they went out there last year and they had a blast, apparently, from the photos and the videos. It just was like a couple of days of just good times. The closed Facebook group is called The Ratties, Rattys, and that's where, that closed group where, we talk a lot about, what's going to be going on and things like that. But I'll be sharing more details soon. I'm just trying to kind of scroll through here to see. It looks like it's going to be September 23rd, 24th, and 25th. So that weekend in September out in California. And we'll be talking to the Ratties more as that date approaches. The cool thing is now I've looked at flights, and there's several different options, flying into LAX or John Wayne or even Long Beach. Of course, some of the Ratties have said, including Rusty, said, yo, if you fly into LAX, we ain't picking you up. But I've got to figure out if I'm going to end up getting a car and doing some of the pop culture stuff and some of the other content that I want to do when I get out there. So, more to come on that. All right, just moving ahead, Lincoln sales. I kind of give these updates, whether it's a car I'm trying to sell, maybe some trends I'm seeing in the market. And here's my message this episode. Prices continue to go up, up, and up. Okay, my feedback to you is do not be afraid of an untouched car that needs everything. Okay, my 64 Continental convertible, I had bought knowing that it was going to need pretty much everything. Okay, I know, depending on where you live in the country, you may not have the resources and things like that. We're very fortunate here in Clearwater. We've got Lincoln Land, we've got Old Lincoln Parts, and then we have Blair Farmer, Teresa, and just some great resources. Okay, but I will tell you, I often see people buy these customized cars or something that's been a little bit, touched, so to speak, and they end up with something that's just been, it's just not good, right? My feedback is always get eyes on a car, whether it's yours or someone you trust or you hire someone to go look at it. I know in the past I have seen people be able to go look at a car and go, hey, in the photos, you're not really seeing this, right? So that's super important. I constantly have people that are looking for these cars. That's why I set up Lincoln Continental Sales. I kind of hit on that the last episode. But, do your research. Don't be afraid to buy something that needs work or that's been sitting. In my opinion, if something's been sitting in a barn for 20, 30 years, very much like what Mark experienced when we had him on, he found a beautiful blue convertible and it needed some work, but he knew that, hey, this car is solid, everything is there. And, now he's really enjoying that car versus, let's say you buy something on the internet and it's the price is increased because it's been customized or it's been lowered or whatever. And then, of course, you get it and you're like, okay, this air suspension's a homemade kit, this, that, the other, all kinds of weird issues. Stuff that photos isn't always going to tell the picture on, so to speak. And what I mean by that is oftentimes you'll see people, and I'm not even talking about Lincolns, but just in general, when they're trying to sell a car, they're going to take the best photos to show an angle so that you don't see, oh, this was welded on, or, oh, this is rusted out, right? They're going to try to take those photos, and oftentimes on eBay, I'll see someone that has one photo that's like 20 feet away from a car. And I'm like, okay, that's very suspect. It's like, where are these other photos at? Now, granted, if you scroll down to the description, sometimes it will link out where then you have 50 photos, okay, of high quality photos that are kind of off the eBay server or however that works. But, look down at the photos. If there's not a lot of photos, ask for them, okay? If they don't want to give you them, there's something suspect. There's some sort of hidden crap going on. I've seen people that are in the business that will also put cars up on lifts, and they'll spray a light coat of undercoating to kind of hide stuff. And when you look at it in photos, you're like, man, that looks good. That's all untouched, man. Wow, look at that. It's suspect if you see underneath a car that's 50, 60 years old, and you see kind of like a nice shine to it, and you're like, something may not be right. Now, again, you could have someone that's pressure washed it and maybe they just took a photo, totally understand. I know Boris at Street Machinery, he's came up with some very clever things, and he's like one of the best in the business in terms of selling good quality stuff, really high-end stuff. I mean, he's made an amazing business out of it, but they've come up with some things on how to get rid of gunk and stuff like that under these cars with using crazy methods, like something to do with like dry ice or something like that, and it works. So don't get me wrong, there are some times if someone puts the time and effort in, they can really clean up an engine bay or an undercarriage of a car. But again, I see on eBay all the time, you'll have someone that'll kind of go in there and spray some stuff and make it look super nice, and it's really just lipstick on a pig. So be careful. Oftentimes, again, if you get a car, maybe the top's got to be gone through, the window tracks need to be degreased, bumpers need to be rechromed, possibly, timing chain, timing gear, manifolds often cracked on these cars, so it has that little annoying sound, when you're giving it, fuel and you take off. Radiators are often clogged. They've been sitting a long time. So all of that stuff is fairly normal for, a shop to maybe do. But, of course, on top of all that, you've got the Lincoln issues in general and the things that the average shops aren't, used to fixing. So, again, I think the bottom line is you can get a nice car out there. A buddy of mine about a year and a half ago got a beautiful white 65, like I think in Oklahoma area. Got it for a good deal. And, it needed the timing chain, the gear. It needed, the oil pan gasket done and things like that. But he's done all that now, and he has a really nice car. And he's enjoying it. He actually took his daughter, my buddy Charles, took his daughter and her bride on a ride. I think it was back in March, maybe April or February or March this year. And again, he hustled hard. He had some local shops kind of do some of the work, and then boom, he's enjoying it. So that's my message. Now, don't just take my word for it. There's an article out there on Haggerty's website, and you can also go back if you want to take my word for it. You can go back to the earlier episode I did in this whole Lincoln Addict Podcast world, and I talk a lot about the things that you need to look at or you need to consider if you're looking at getting a 60s Lincoln Continental, whether it's a sedan or it's a convertible. All right, moving right along. Lincoln's in the movies, TV shows. Here's one for you. Although I sometimes will lump in even music videos, I'm going to go a step further and lump in album covers, okay? So I collect cassettes, I love tapes, or tape cassettes, I love vinyl albums, I love CDs, right? So I stumbled across this album not too long ago, and it was a gospel album, believe it or not. I don't know how I even stumbled across it. And it still had the plastic sleeve. So, obviously from a collector standpoint, I've got other, vinyl albums that still have the plastic sleeve. Back in the day, people would just kind of cut that right side and pull the album out and listen to it and put it back in, and it was on their shelf, and they had no reason to take off that sleeve, right? So I love all that kind of cool stuff. The ironic thing with this one, it's a band I had never heard of, J.D. Sumner in the Stamps, okay? Vintage Gospel was the name of the album. And on the cover, the only reason I bought it from a Lincoln perspective is on the cover is a red 64 Lincoln Continental, totally stock car. Now on Discogs, 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 I believe is how you pronounce it. Of course, I'm on there oftentimes, updating my collection or looking for stuff. According to them, it was a Skylight label. The album came out in 1974. The genre is folk, world, and country. Style is gospel. So this is one that it's not my cup of tea in terms of music, but I thought I just something for the few dollars I paid. I had to have it because it has a red Lincoln Continental 64, and man, it looks awesome. So I'll continue to probably share some more of these in the upcoming episodes because I have other albums that have Lincolns on them, and I have some that I'm still looking for. So Lincolns in the movies, TV shows, music videos, and now album covers. All right, next, Smuggler's Blues updates. Not a lot to share here. If you've been a long-time listener, you know that I usually talk about kind of what I've got going on. But I am doing some wiring in my home shop, and because of that, I was able to box up a bunch of stuff, and I'm hoping that once I start putting it all back, once the wiring's finished for the electrical, then I'm hoping that I'll be able to reorganize everything, maybe get some new shelves and things like that. I often find myself watching videos on YouTube about people that rehab their garage, and I love seeing the before and after stuff, so more to come there. The bottom line is I'm looking forward to having really good lighting in there, so I'll be more apt to want to work later into the evenings on, after my day job. I did, one key update for Smuggler's Blues is I was coming up on May 1st this year, so a couple days ago, and I was looking back at past videos and photos, just trying to look for content to post, and I realized on May 1st of 2021, I had went through and ran some wiring and was kind of getting ready to finally install the kick panels in my car. Well, going back about a year, I would take video and I wouldn't sit down to edit it, to stitch it together, and to post it, okay? I've made it a hobby this past year to really kind of ingrain myself and learn how to edit better and just get something out, some sort of content. So what I did was I took the time and I made that a 2-part YouTube post on Lincoln Addict. I've got some good comments on there, so I appreciate everyone that listens or watches, rather, on YouTube. Very, very much appreciate that. I think I am going to make a version or a video 3. And what I didn't do in the second one is I didn't really wrap up and kind of show you guys what I ended with. But I came across some photos when I took it over to my buddy Paul Lane, who's one of my best friends. Great guy. He built the kick panels. Once I kind of got it all installed and we put the set screw in on each, he took his oscilloscope, being the audiophile that he is and the stuff that he just knows inside and out. And what he was able to do is set the amp he set the gain on the amp to the perfect point so that nothing would distort, even if the music is turned up really, really loud. So I found some of those photos, and I think what I'll do hopefully this weekend, maybe on Sunday, is pull the car out and kind of show the end result. Now it's been a year, and I haven't done anything with an amp rack, and I haven't, the car's still not bagged, and there's things like that got to get done, but at least this will set the foundation, and then going forward, I'll do more videos as things start to come together. But check it out, Lincoln Addict on YouTube. Lastly, I want to say shout out to Shelly from NTX Firearms. She found a fantastic Lincoln. I know Tony Boss Bolin helped make that happen, and I'll make sure I post up and tag her if you're following us on Instagram or Facebook. But shout out to Shelly. She's hardcore NTX Firearms. She loves her Lincoln. She's always chiming in on comments on posts with comments. Go out there and give her a follow. And again, I don't have my phone in front of me, but I'll make sure we post it, and then you can tap on hers, and you can follow her via Instagram. So, with that being said, a little bit shorter intro. I want to give, again, a huge shout out to Devious Customs. You can visit deviouscustoms.com to order parts. CC Cycle Wheels, which is known as Colorado Custom Wheels. Go to coloradocustom.com and order those Lincoln replica wheels or whatever you could think of. Michael and team will take care of you. Steel Rubber, that's STEELE rubber.com. They're your place for anything weather stripping on these 60s Lincolns. Last but not least, no matter if it's your daily driver or your precious Lincoln Continental, Griot's Garage, that's GRIOTS garage.com. They could take care of you with detail supplies, videos on their social media as well. for tips and tricks and just anything you can think of, from wash buckets to pads to soap. Everything but the water, I think. So have a great weekend. Thank you guys all for the continued support. Let's roll in now to audio from Skagg, a.k.a. Skip. Great dude. I hope you guys enjoy it. Peace out. Hey. So as I mentioned, we're going to roll in here now to some audio with my friend Skip. And Skip, I just want to welcome you to Lincoln Addict Podcast. How you doing?
Doing great, man. Thanks for having me.
Hey, no problem, man. I love watching your content. We'll talk all about it. Now, my understanding is your nickname, though, and for folks, we'll draw the line in the sand now and say, hey, go out to YouTube and search Skagg, S-K-A-G-G, Skaggs with an apostrophe S, Garage. That's your nickname, right?
That is my nickname. So is Skip.
Right, Skip and Skagg. And that probably goes back to the old days, man. Was there a little story behind the Skagg nickname?
Well, I've been Skip all my life. My dad gave me the nickname of Skipper, then it got shortened to Skip. But when Mick Jagger, well, I'm not going to say when he came out because he was out way before I was born, but my sister, she started calling me Skagg, like Mick Jagger. And it's, yeah, so that's where that came from, to be honest. And
that's cool, man. Yeah.
So between Mick Jagger and Boss Skaggs, because we were big rock fans growing up. So.
Oh yeah, it was a great era, man. And my dad and I, rest in peace to my pops. We love Tom Petty, and Tom Petty's from Gainesville, and man, the amount of stuff I've consumed on YouTube, learning about certain things and stuff he played, and I mean, I tell you what, I mean that era is just amazing, and there's so much, dude. Love rock and roll, and I mean, how can you not, right? I mean, it's that Americana music.
Yeah, Tom Petty gone too soon for sure.
I know, man. Well, I wanted to kind of start off a little bit. I know you through the YouTube channel and the content you put out. We'll talk about it, but why don't you give a little bit of backstory on yourself, maybe where you grew up and anything else you want to share?
Well, I grew up in Macon, Georgia, which is middle Georgia.
Okay.
And 4 of us kids, and I hit 18. I left Macon because Macon sucked. And joined the Marine Corps. I was in the Marine Corps for 6 years, traveled all over, Far East. Spent most of my time on the West Coast. And that's kind of how I got in during the mid to late 80s. Mini trucks, Lord, that's how I got into that whole scene.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy to think, like, do you remember on the OLP podcast I produced, the truck podcast, we talk about what was kind of the gateway drug? Like, did you see something in terms of a car or truck, or was your dad into the stuff? Like, what was really that connection you maybe had?
Well, my dad was not into cars, and it's kind of funny because my brother and I, we're both into cars. He's more Volkswagens. He likes his old school cars and old trucks, but he's into Volkswagens. But I was just into cars in general, and that kind of sparked when I was in California, and I spent a lot of time in Riverside. And on Sundays, these guys would roll through the lowriders. The mini trucks were coming out. You remember they were slamming the Suzuki Samurais?
Yep. Oh yeah.
Dancing beds, stereos. Oh man, I was in heaven.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of that, I want to give a shameless plug to my buddy Kurt. He has a YouTube channel called 80s 80s Life. I had him on OLP, and he has a Slam Samurai from he lives the 80s life. And actually one that he had, you'll appreciate this, Skagg, one that he had before, which I do believe he sold. Now he's got another one that's killer. It actually briefly, for like a split second, can be seen in the NWA Straight Outta Compton movie. Apparently,
really?
Yeah, they were looking, because if you look back at I'm a huge hip hop fan. If you look back at some of the 80s stuff, like it was Cube or Easy had one. I think it was Cube's. It was like white and like with the pinkish colors to it, which is kind of funny to say, but it was like a white color. But so when they were filming, they were looking, and he kind of told the story a little bit over on Our Lifestyle Podcast. But I always thought that was cool, and I tell you what, man, those things are timeless, aren't they? Man, that was a great era.
They are. You know what? Let me throw a little something in there about NWA.
Okay.
We used to go to the swap meets, and I have an original mixtape from Dr. Dre that we bought from them at a swap meet in California. No lie. it's been the tape is broken. Well,
Sure.
the shell that broken, but that tape is in another cassette, another shell.
Right. Oh,
But I
wow.
still have that tape. Yeah.
That's insane. Yeah, because I think being it's funny. I'm a huge Dr. Dre fan. I've researched a lot. I've got his book. His mom wrote a book. The Rhodium is one I think they used to go to, but there were the Compton swap meets and stuff, and people do collect a lot of that. And of course, that was the early days. Eve After Dark and all that, and they kind of hit on some of that in the movie. But it's crazy. Like, hear me out on this. I tell people all the time. It's like, okay, imagine being a platinum artist or producer in the 80s, 90s, 2010s, and oh, by the way, 2020s, he just led the Super Bowl. That's 5 decades, dude. I mean, that is insanity to me, the longevity. So we could do a whole episode on that, Skag,
We could.
Which I think is cool.
We could.
But it makes sense, right, to tie in a little bit to the West. Their culture of car stuff is so big there. And I tell you, although as a kid, I don't consider myself a lowrider guy. My buddy Vic is huge in the lowriders, dude. I grew up in the era of seeing, Eazy-E coined the phrase rolling down the street on my 6.4. A lot of that stuff, like, I saw it over and over again on MTV, and then Ice Cube, had the, I think it's called the Family Jewel Impala in the Today Was a Good Day video. But all that custom culture out there, it sounds like it also rubbed off on you some, man.
It did. And then, when I got back, well, actually, my last tour when I was in the Marine Corps, I was in Japan. And so, and I tell people this, and they're like, what, really? But in Japan, they have the Japanese inspections, which are really expensive, like when you get your car inspected. And so if you ran into a guy who was transferring out, he's coming back to the States, and he was putting his car up for sale, and it had an inspection that was up to date, you could snag that car and not have to worry about paying for another inspection.
Right, okay.
But I had a Skyline.
Oh, wow.
Well, no, it's not. I mean, they were all over the place.
Right, so, like a Honda Civic here almost, but I know what you mean.
Yeah. So actually, I got a little bit into Japanese cars. When I got back to the States, I had a Subaru. And I was the first when I moved back to Georgia, I was the first person to lower a Japanese car in Macon. Anyway, I didn't stay in Macon that long before I moved to Atlanta, but
yeah,
it's just kind of funny. And then, from there, it's, coming back into American cars, but I still like the Japanese cars too. But
yeah, well, yeah, and I meant to say, thank you for your service. It's a thing that sometimes, I always try to say that, my friends, some of our family, especially my wife's family, did serve. So thank you very much, man.
I appreciate it. It's a history in our family, man. My dad was a Korean War vet in the Marine Corps, and my brother served. We kind of go back and forth because he has a Cadillac, I have a Lincoln. He was in the Army, I was in the Marine Corps, so it's kind of
yeah. And you guys aren't twins or anything, huh? You're just brothers.
Oh no. He's a younger brother, but yeah.
Yeah. Two of my best friends, they're twins, and they they argue about everything, and not argue, but they razz each other about, I was born first and this, and they're very competitive. So it's kind of that brotherly love type thing. But very cool. In the truck world, in the mini truck world, I've had guys on from Australia on OLP. And one thing that's been unique that I've learned over the years is, like, here, I know we sometimes laugh the stuff that we see driving down the road in America, right? And I'm like, whatever, it's none of my business. But in Australia, they have kind of similar to what you were saying, very strict rules. So, like, if you want to bag something, the way it's been explained to me is like here, in most places that you live in the U.S., if you want to do construction on your house, you have to have building plans, you have to have inspections, it's got to be done for life safety stuff, right?
Right.
And, very similar as far as the way it's explained to me with, like, if you want to bag something there, it's got to be like an engineer plan to say, yep, and then they got to inspect it and go, yeah, that's going to be safe. So a lot of the stuff you see in Australia that's bagged is super clean stuff because it's, there's a lot of thought. It's no slight against kind of the weekend warriors, but, from a professional standpoint, they have to really make sure their stuff is solid.
Yeah, one of the guys, and actually I'm a member of an online Lincoln club called the Dead Gentleman Motor Club, and we have some members that are in Europe, and there's this one guy in particular, and he's in Germany, and he was talking about when he bagged his car, how, I mean, you should see his lower control arms compared to like mine.
They're like a tank, I bet. Yeah.
Exactly. And he was saying how, you can't just do anything you want, even though the car is 40, 44, 45 years old, you can't just do what you want to it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's different. I know, and what's cool is, to jump into the automotive stuff some here, I got into the mini trucks, and guys were bagging them in the early 90s, and then the channeling, body dropping kind of comes in shortly after that. But what I always thought was cool is if you look at the older cars, like my buddy's got an 84 Cutlass. He loves them, Vic. And, just like with what we were going to talk about with your 70s Lincoln, a lot of those cars, I mean, dude, you just put a bag in there instead of the spring, and, the control arms were beefy anyway. So that's the cool thing I like about so many cars. And versus the trucks, you had to body drop and channel them to get them super low, like something like what you got, or an 84 Cutlass and stuff. It's like, man, you bag it on all four corners, and that thing is, pretty low. And that's one thing I like about older cars.
Yeah, and the 70s versus the 60s, because the 60s were unibodies.
Yeah.
But the 70s, like my car, body on frame, but the frame's channeled. So, so it's basically a body dropped. It's body dropped already.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because you can lay them down pretty low, which I think is great. I mentioned earlier, again, if you're on YouTube, please do yourself a favor. I mean, obviously you're here listening to Lincoln Addict Podcast. You can go out and follow Skagg's, SKAGG''S Garage, where you got a ton of videos, okay? A ton of videos out there, which I think is good. I love watching them. Talk to us a little bit about your setup, man, because, I always love seeing people's garages. You got this lift. You got this pretty cool setup. The floor looks awesome. Is that like at your house, man?
Yeah. Long story short, the house that we're in, we were actually planning on moving, and then my wife and I had kids late in life, and I've been trying to get her to move farther out, from the city, because Atlanta's just expanding out. Mm-hmm. And she's like, well, you know what, we aren't, the house is almost paid off. We're not leaving this house till the kids are off to college. And I'm like, okay, well, I've been wanting to move my office home, and she's like, why don't you go ahead and build your garage and put your office above it? And one of the things that drew me to my house was that behind us, well, the subdivision that we're in, we're kind of on a bastard street of the subdivision where we don't connect to the rest of the subdivision. But there's a road behind my house. So we're on about 1/4 of an acre. I'm sorry, 3/4 of an acre. And so I have a back entrance. So she's like, yeah, go and put your garage back there. And, it just grew from there. And cool. I was like, okay, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right. And it's,
it's pretty cool.
2-story. Yeah. And, I actually, because I'm also into motorcycles, and I buy them and then I flip them, and I said, okay, I'm going to need a lift to do what I need to do. So I actually sold my CBR, and it paid for the lift. So that worked out, and my wife and daughter did all the artwork on it, and I'm a real big sci-fi fan, and basically I'm a gearhead geek.
That's cool, man.
Yeah, and it just kind of went from there. And
one thing that sticks out in the videos, my dad and I did the epoxy, kind of like just a Home Depot, Amazon epoxy kit. The floor that you have in yours, with all it looks like it's got a lot of the speckle stuff, that you kind of drop into it. The floor looks awesome, and I'm a big, even though I try to be more organized, I love seeing a shop with a super clean floor, man. It looks good in there.
I appreciate it, and it's funny because I really, I guess about 2 weeks ago, I mopped it for the first time because I hadn't. Well, it's funny, you do these videos, and what would normally take maybe a couple of weekends takes a lot longer because my wife's a slave driver. And so the floor is just trashed, and so I swept it, then I blew it out, and I finally mopped it, and I was like, oh, this is what the floor used to look like.
Yeah, I know, right? But, it's like when you do it, you think, hey, I'm always going to keep it clean, and then, of course, these older cars are leaking this, or you do a project, and then you're like, boom, pouring the the stuff down, the soak-up stuff here and there. But, yeah, it looks pretty awesome. Now, one thing that I thought that I want to talk about before we talk about your awesome Lincoln, dude, is I love how your videos, and this is why I'd encourage folks, if you haven't followed Skagg's Garage on YouTube, go do it. I love how your videos are done. Do you kind of set up the tripod and you kind of have a mindset on maybe some of the things you're going to do? Or how does that come about?
Honestly, I have what I want to work on or the idea of what I want to work on. Okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And my wife steps in, and her background is in graphic arts, but she's done a lot of photography over the years, and she's getting into videography. And she actually does a lot of the designs for the T-shirts that I wear and stuff like that.
Cool.
And so she sets up a lot of shots. Now, some of the videos I do myself, but I just hand her that footage, and she puts in B-roll. And I can't say enough how without her, none of this. The videos would be there, but the quality wouldn't be there.
Yeah, you got good thumbnails. Like recent one talking about AccuAir E-Level. Like you got a good thumbnail photo there of the phone and things. Why don't you give her a shout out? What's your wife's name?
Her name is Michelle. And
awesome.
And the name of she has a website, and she has Instagram. Well, and Facebook, but the name of her company is Creative Bubbles, and that's CRE, the number 8, TIVE. So Creative Bubbles, and she's when I met her, she was not really a gearhead, but now she's become one. And if you go to her store and all that, she has stuff for everybody. She's really big into Jeeps, so she has a lot of stuff, a lot of patriotic. Armed forces kind of merch. Yeah. And,
very cool. I Googled it, CRE number 8 TIVE Bubbles, and of course it took me right to the site. I see it on there, and you got some cool red, white, and blue stuff as well. So, yeah, it's great when you have a significant other like I often give my wife a shout out because, she allows me to, Lincoln's is one thing, right, because of the cost and these different stuff, but, to do the podcasting. So it's cool that your wife embraces all of, of Skagg's Garage and all of that that stuff that comes along with it.
Yeah, well, she's my better 3/4, man. She's more than a half. I can pretty much get away with what I want to do if I got an angle on it financially, if you know what I mean. So.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. Now, before we talk about your Lincoln, we hit off a few minutes ago on some hip hop, and being a big hip hop fan, I got a chance to go to Atlanta around the time of the Olympics back in the day. But I grew up listening to, I know you're going to love some of these bands and some of these groups, but like Outkast, Dungeon Family, even Criss Cross. I mean, that was big when I was coming up as a kid. But if you think about how big Atlanta has been for hip hop, even with like Ludacris and so many other artists, Big Mike, just so many different dudes, man, it's just crazy to me. And I think Atlanta's been just an awesome hub, dude. What do you like most about kind of the city, even though you're trying to kind of move a little bit further out on the outskirts?
Well, that's just it. Atlanta, and you've been here, so Atlanta itself is not that big. It's all the towns and the cities that make up Atlanta around it. But what I like, and I've been here for 31 years, is that it has a little bit of everything for everybody. And music wise, for me, like you were saying with the Atlanta, what do they used to call it? Because they had a name for the style of hip hop that came out of Atlanta. I can't remember.
Oh yeah.
But honestly, like that, like the Outkast and everything, up until maybe the mid to late 90s is, all the way back into the 80s, is my hip hop era. But, we had growing up, because my music taste is so diverse, and growing up, my mom was into to rock, opera, and gospel, and my dad was into jazz, blues, and gospel. Of course, he was a deacon in the church, so there wasn't too much going on as far as but so we had just this crazy mix. But in Atlanta, you can find that, man, any kind of concert you want to go to, I don't care if it's rock, hip hop, jazz, blues, whatever. And you'll notice my tag says blues man. Man, I love blues, and I mean, you can go anywhere in Atlanta and find whatever kind of music you want.
Yeah, like a blues
And
club or even record stores. I remember how big those were. Like when the few times I visited up in the '90s, man, it was just crazy. I remember even being a big Wu-Tang fan. I'm the only person I know that went to the Wu Wear store, which
the
that's
Wu-Tang had a store, man. I got a Wu Wear sweatshirt.
Yes, we went there and we bought stuff, and that was around that era. And I still have some stickers I haven't peeled off, from like Ghostface Killah and stuff that I got there, And
There you go.
But yeah, Atlanta was like, they say the gateway to the South. I think is the way they say it. But I mean, there's been a lot of influence, and obviously NBA and some of the All-Star games, and even with the Falcons and stuff. It's been there a long time, man. That's for sure.
Yep. And I've been a big Braves fan too. Like, well, big in the '90s, of course, when they went to the World Series at first. But I remember going to the Braves Stadium, and you could just general admission and sit wherever you wanted to sit.
Right. Yeah. Before like
But,
Glavine and all those guys got there, and it really started
Oh yeah.
building. The other thing that's cool is it's a long story, but rest in peace to my pops. He was a Packers fan since being a young kid. His dad liked him because of the whole Vince Lombardi, just the attitude he had, and the winning pedigree and things like that. But
Sure.
what's ironic, some people forget that Brett Favre was drafted by the Atlanta Falcons, which is ironic. And of course, he was there a year, and then the Packers end up with him. Ron Wolf signs him and kind of gets him over there, and then the rest was history. But it's weird how that stuff works out in sports sometimes.
Yeah, it does. It does. And I tell you what, they have really good potential as far as, well, we all know about the Braves from last year, but
Right.
they'll do it again. But like the Atlanta Hawks, and it's like they got this one kid, Trey Young, and it's like they really need to build a team around this kid because, I mean, he's dynamite.
Yeah,
And,
when I was younger, I always remember because we collected cards and kind of being a product of the 80s and 90s. I think it was, I want to say Lenny Wilkins was the coach for a long time. I'm trying to remember. I know the guy's face, but that was back in the day of like Dominique, and him going back and forth with Jordan in the dunk contest. So there's kind of that long, rich history of sports and stuff like that. But the other thing that's cool, and we talked about it briefly before we started, I've never made it to the Coffee and Octane. I did get a chance to meet Brian Fuller, who's on Carfix, but he's also been on some of those shows that center around that big event. How big is that event for someone that maybe is just a listener, maybe lives somewhere else in the world? Is Coffee and Octane bigger than a normal like Cars and Coffee? Do you think?
Caffeine and Octane is, to quote a famous president, it's huge. It's
Right.
huge.
It's huge.
Yeah, it is. And it's the biggest in the nation.
Wow.
And it's at Perimeter Mall, which is north of the city. Yeah, actually, it's not that far from Georgia 400. And there are different sections, and it's every Sunday, first Sunday of every month. Not every Sunday, the first Sunday of every month, rain or shine. And it's from 7 a.m. to 11. And you can see anything from old school classics to Yugos, literally. A lot of JDM cars, and then you have the car clubs that show up. The Porsche guys, the Lamborghini guys, the McLaren guys, the Mustang guys. Then every month they have kind of like a theme. They'll have the Jeep invasion. They'll have the Volkswagen invasion. They'll have, and it's always something new when you go, and you're guaranteed to see something that you want to see.
Yes. Yeah, that's the cool thing. And I've seen photos in that show. I know Brian Fuller's kind of in there, the older guy. There's a couple different kind of characters on their personalities, but it does seem like it's pretty big. And when you said the Perimeter Mall, it kind of makes sense on where they can have it because, man, some of the drone footage from there is like, wow, there's a lot of people there.
Yeah, they recently, well, this past year, they moved it from one side of the mall because it had outgrew one side of the mall, which was kind of limited on parking, and moved it around to the back side of the mall, which had way more parking, and people could expand or go from area to area or genre to genre of cars, if you will, kind of seamlessly.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just really helps out a lot with being able to navigate through and see what you want to see. And the cool thing is that, once you're in the lot, it's not, they don't make you, they're not going to make you stay, but they politely suggest that, okay, once you're in the lot, you can't leave until 11 if you brought a car there.
Yeah, so is it like a mad dash, like at 11, everyone fires their stuff up, and is it kind of like leaving a football game, or a sports game where it's like, man, it takes a minute to get out of there?
It's all really done well, and it's so fun because people line up to take pictures and videos of cars leaving.
Nice.
And
like the rollout.
Yeah, and where they have it now is so many different exits that it's not it's not a bottleneck.
Yeah, they can kind of flush everyone out.
Exactly.
Pretty good. That's pretty cool stuff. We're talking to Skip from Skagg's Garage. Again, go on YouTube. It's SKAGG''S Garage. Check them out. Let's talk about your Lincoln a little bit. So, you mentioned your brother has this Cadillac. Like, when did you kind of fall into this Lincoln? Talk to us a little bit about what year it is and things like that.
Okay. It's a 79 Lincoln Continental town car. And quick backstory on why the 70s Lincoln, because I love the 60s Lincolns and had been looking forever for a 60s Lincoln, and that you either find them and they're just totally ratted out, or if they're halfway decent, they're expensive, and then if they're restored, they're really expensive.
Right.
And then I started thinking about it because growing up, my dad had Lincolns, my uncles had Lincolns, and the last Continental my dad had was a 79.
Okay.
And I have fond memories of my sister went to Valdosta State. Well, you know where Valdosta is.
Yes. Yep.
Valdosta, Georgia. And I have fond memories of my mom. We're packing up my sister's trunk to go off to college, and that her trunk would fit in the trunk of the car. And we'd head down 75 and and our Lincoln, well, the 79, whenever it was that they started just putting 85 miles an hour on the speedometer as opposed to 120.
Right.
But my mom would have that thing buried. Just flying down 75. But, so when I started, I was like, you know what, I'm giving up on the 60s Lincoln unless I just win the lottery or something.
Yep.
Unless I find one with a good deal, but
when
I started thinking about it, it's like, I'm going to look for a 70s Lincoln, and I really want one like my pops had, and so I found it and did the smart thing that any husband would do. I waited till my wife went out of town, and I brought it home.
Nice.
Yeah.
How far did you have to go to get it, to reel it in?
Actually, backstory on my car. I'd been looking on Craigslist. And I've been on eBay and stuff like that, but I found this one on Craigslist and I actually watched it, maybe for a good couple of months. And it was in Forest Park, which is just south of Atlanta. It's down near the Atlanta airport. And the guy wanted, I think, $1,900 for the car.
Wow.
And when I bought it, this is the funny story, is that when I bought it and I'm going through the glove box and I already made the deal with him and I'm looking through it and I pull out a Chick-fil-A corporate registration and I pull out a Chick-fil-A corporate fleet insurance card.
Wow.
So I was like, dude, what's the deal with this car? And come to find out, and if anybody in the car community knows that Truett Cathy, who was the founder of Chick-fil-A, he's a big car guy.
Oh, yeah.
And so this guy, he was a friend of Truett's son, and when they wanted to move cars out of their inventory, he'd sell them on consignment.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, and some people, I'm a huge Chick-fil-A fan, which is crazy, but it goes back, and I've been only one time, because you've been around the greater Atlanta area, is the Dwarf House. That was kind of, I think, even before Chick-fil-A. And I remember going there. I visited my buddy Doug. And the next morning, he goes, "You want me to make breakfast?" I go, "No, we're going to get on the road." And we headed south, and we went to the Dwarf House. And, dude, we walk in, and there's I always heard about it. There's it's like a Chick-fil-A buffet. I'm like, dude, this is score, man.
Yeah.
But that's cool. So to go back, so talking about Truett, Truett Cathy, I think it was. So that's what I had heard, that he was a car guy.
Oh, yeah. He had and I kicked myself, man, because I kept saying that I was going to go down or make an appointment and go down and have him to sign my car registration and my insurance card. And then he passed away.
Yeah.
But he actually had a warehouse basically, and you could actually book tours to go through
Interesting.
and take a look at his cars and stuff like that. And I hate that I missed it, because everybody I've talked to that have met him is like, he was just a great guy, and he'd pull out from his pocket and hand you a coupon for a free sandwich.
Yeah, that's cool, man. That's cool. Well, there's a Haggerty.com article, and although they're not a paid sponsor or anything, I have their insurance, and I love that company. They had an article several years back that said, today we celebrate the last of the Mastodon luxury cars, talking about the 77 through 79 Lincoln Continental town car and the town coupe. But Mastodon is almost a good word to use for those cars, because you think the 60s are big. I swear the 70s are even larger, man.
I got buddies with the 60s Lincoln, and everybody's like, oh, that's huge. I was like, yeah, okay, let me pull it beside you.
You're like, hold my beer. I don't know if you drink, but you're like, hold my beer, man.
Yeah, watch this.
Right. Let me show you. But my dad used to tell, like, when you said this hit a chord with me. When my dad was younger, he would sit. He had this uncle that was like the flim flam man, they called him, And it's funny, he actually had roots in Georgia. And he was the Uncle Flim Flam man, always looking for the easy, quick buck. But he had a Cadillac, and my dad would sit in the front seat, and he'd go, man, don't feel like we're doing 100, does it? And it's crazy in these big boat cars with these big engines, right? Big blocks, with the torque and stuff, like you can cruise at 70, 80 miles an hour, and it's kind of like a new car, because we've all ridden in new cars or driven them, where you're like, man, I can't believe I'm doing 80 miles an hour. It doesn't feel like it, right? Or people are blasting past you on the interstate. These older cars, they could even kind of do that, and you don't even realize it.
Right.
Which I think is cool.
We Caffeine and Octane had they stopped during the COVID, and I hope they bring it back, but they had a Caffeine and Octane at Jekyll Island. And I went down for that. And so that took us out I-16 towards Savannah, and then, on to Jekyll. But on I-16, it's just, there's nothing on I-16 but I-16, so it's, had that needle buried and just rolling along, man. It's, but not much off the line, but once you get them going, it's nothing to push them.
Yeah, a balk on it, right? So you kind of established 79 Lincoln Continental town car. One of the most unique things about this car, right? So we sometimes see people, they comment on our stuff. They're like, oh, you guys ruin these cars, bags, this and that. And look, I'm all for, if a car is super, 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 super nice, I mean, it's hard to cut into them or bag them. I get it. And I get why people like certain things. I love custom cars. One of the things that sticks out to me is the rear doors. Talk to us a little bit about, so the listeners get an idea of what's been done to the rear doors, because it's not stock.
No. I have one of only two that I know of and actually I can't even say in the U.S., because there's another guy in our car club. He has one that he did himself, but I actually converted the rear doors to coach doors. That's what Lincoln called them, but suicide doors.
Yep.
And it's kind of ironic, because when I got the car, it was dove gray, and in my mind, the only thing that I wanted to do to it was paint it and put some wheels on it. That was it. I was going to drive it.
Mm-hmm.
And
that old story we tell ourselves, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I ran across this guy who this friend of mine recommended him to me, and he's like, go see this guy. And when I told him what I wanted to do, and of course, my car being different, the 79 Continentals, they have the dogleg fender, that curves on the rear door. So I couldn't put two hinges on the rear doors to make them open, like coach doors. And so I ran this guy. He said, "Oh yeah, I can do it." And so that's how it all began. It's like, I hadn't even thought about putting suicide doors on this car, and okay, this is going to happen. This is going to happen.
Yeah.
And so we made it happen.
That's pretty cool.
And with the story behind the car and what it is, with the history of the car, I've had people, how could you do that? Because you're talking about
Yeah, the purist and things like that.
Yeah, but I'm like, okay, this is a 79 Continental. There's nothing special about it. If there ever was a base model made of a 79 Lincoln Continental town car, I had it because it had nothing close to what my dad had in his car, which his was fully loaded. He had the quadraphonic 8-track. He had the mirror mounted thermometer, so you could just glance out the window, see what the temperature was outside. His had the SureTrack, which was like an early version of anti-lock brakes.
Okay.
And of course, they all had the automatic headlights. And my car, it had an AM/FM radio that was not stereo, just AM/FM radio.
Okay.
And I think the only extra that my car had is that it had a CB. And I think that was probably because it was a corporate fleet car.
Yeah, and you said CB, not CD, because they didn't have CD players then, right?
Right.
Yep.
A Citizens Band radio, breaker.
breaker
Rest in peace, C.W. McCall.
There you go, man. Yeah, you got the history. I think of like Smokey and the Bandit and some of those movies, as a kid, loving them, of course. But
so the Convoy song, right?
Eastbound and down.
I'm talking about we got a mighty convoy trucking into the night. Look him up, man. Everybody think that it was Vanilla Ice, but C.W. McCall was the first white rapper.
Okay, right. Yeah.
Dig it, man. I'm telling you.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree, Skag. So in the truck world, you got guys back, in the OBS days. Now they're called Chevy OBS trucks. The Tahoes that were the shorter version of the Suburban. So I had a Suburban. I love big vehicles. Love this. I had a blue one. The Tahoes, it's very similar. So like the window only rolled down a little bit because of the dog leg. And then when you had guys that, lay these out, they put these huge wheel tubs and they kind of come into the door jam area. So to your point, there's some vehicles that are a little tougher to do the suicide rear doors because you don't have as much meat there, to be able to mount like a dual hinge or whatever you're doing. When he ended up doing it and you got this beautiful car and it's starting to kind of come together and whatnot, was it a process of like dropping it off and waiting months and months, or like how did all of that go with the suicide rear doors?
Well, honestly, with like a lot of projects like that you put in the hands of somebody else, and the guy that did is great. We're still friends to this day. But he was big into customization and stuff like that. He actually came out of Miami.
Okay.
And so he did a lot of celebrity cars too. And it just so happened that my car went in a little bit before he took on a project for Chauncey Black from Blackstreet. You remember him?
Yes, I do.
Okay, Blackstreet. And he wound up doing his G-Wagon. And Chauncey Black's first G-Wagon to ever have suicide doors on it. And so my project got pushed back. And
like so many do.
Yeah. And so we actually, we had deadlines that were set, and actually all the deadlines that were set, he set them, and those would just come and go. And at this point, the car had been painted, the doors had been done, but the interior wasn't put back together, and the trim was whatever. And so I was like, you know what, if you're not done by the end of the year, I'm coming to get my car in January.
Yeah, you kind of set that line in the sand, just because you're anxious, you want to do your own thing with it.
Yeah, and I still had stuff to do that I was going to do, because basically his job was paint, and he did the fab on the doors, which honestly I could have did the door handle swap, because I'm proficient in that, but he did the hard work of
the heavy lifting of like the major modification.
Yeah, the big hinge that lives in there that holds the door, and they're still working fine to this day.
Yeah. Well, my buddy Matt Torgerson, back in the day when I first got in the mini trucks and he's bag and body dropping and stuff, that was one of his specialties. He had a certain way to do the suicide doors, and there's trucks that have been around 20 years at suicide doors, and they have not sagged at all, which I think is cool. he even had there was a guy in Orlando that he kind of knew, and I forget. I want to say, for some reason it jumped on my head, it was called like the toy store or the toy shop or something, and it was like Shaq had this guy build a couple vehicles and whatnot. But I think Shaq at the time had like a Tahoe or a Suburban, and it had the barn door hinges. And mine had, of course, the gate. Well, if you've ever looked at the OBS Chevy, you see those ugly. I always loved the barn doors, but the hinges look so weird because they're on the outside of the vehicle. That was a factory thing. So like Shaq had one, and he wanted to put take those out and have it just where they're still barn doors, but they're on the inside. And my buddy Matt had went over there, and he had a certain way to do them. And like I said, they stood the test of time. Now our friend Robbie Reynolds, you probably seen, I posted before, he's the guy that's got the 68 coupe, him and his wife Megan. They have the coupe, and it's the only one that we know in the world that has suicide doors. And his are freaking awesome too. And he's from like the Maryland area. Yeah. So, I kind of wanted to throw a couple of those things out there because I think like with yours, it's so unique, man. And I mean, you got it. You have to have people that scratch their head going, now wait a minute, is this factory? Like, do you get asked that all the time?
All the time. One of my videos on my channel where I just really go into talking about the history of the car. And that's, at a show or what have you, and people walk up and it's ooh and ah. But you have that handful or that two handful of people, or usually they're old heads, and it's like, what year is this car again? And I'll tell them, it's a 79. Okay, those aren't factory. No. And to my, the fabricator's credit, I mean, they look factory.
Yeah,
I mean, the way he did it.
Yeah, and moving the hinge. My buddy Jimmy, he does a lot of custom work in Edgewater, Florida, and he did recently for a guy he's in a wheelchair. They airbagged and laid out a brand new Ram truck, a dually. I think it's sick, dude. The guy rolls up to it literally in his wheelchair, but he suicided the rear doors, and he moved the handle like what yours is, and that gives it that factory look, man.
It's funny you mentioned that. In my search on eBay for my Lincoln, I found this one Lincoln, and it had a handicap. What was it? It had a handicap. I'd call it modification or whatever.
Throttle for the throttle or for the doors?
No, it had the driver's side rear door was a suicide door.
Ooh, wow!
Just on the one door, not on the passenger side. Just on the one door. Wow. And and I don't know whatever happened to that car, and I looked at it for the longest on eBay, and it got sold. And of course, you don't know what happened to it after that.
Sure.
I did see that, and I can't remember where that car was, but yeah, cool. And the whole thing just kind of snowballed after that. And then once I started going to Caffeine and Octane, and people looking at the cars, a couple of casting agents. And my car's been in so many rap videos, man. It's not even funny.
That's sick, dude. Yeah, and you make a little bit of side change for that if you want, right? Or you could just be like, yeah, sure, whatever, that's cool.
Nah, my paint and and my hinges have been paid for.
Yeah, because you can make that side hustle.
Yeah, I did a van spot for this one. Well, actually, it was 4 vans. It was this was like one of the most corporate shoots that I did, and I had to do non-disclosures and all that kind of stuff, corporate insurance and all that. But Vans came into town, and they used Johnny, this guy that cast me a lot, and we did a commercial for this kid. His name's JID, but people call him Jid, but his rap name is J.I.D.
Okay.
And Vans sponsors him, and so they did a. I don't know if you've ever seen the Vans off the wall spots on YouTube. Yeah. So if you look JID, you'll see my car.
Yeah, very cool. Now, so you kind of hinted, right? You basically got the 79. You have the suicide rear doors. You end up painting it from the Dove gray. You paint it black, and then the wheels, to me, set it off because the wheels kind of bring in the color from the interior, right? So talk to us about that.
Yeah. I had my heart set on 2 colors when I first decided I wasn't going to paint it. And one was the Ford Tuxedo Black. And if you ever seen that in the sunlight, it's just, it just dances. It's got so much flake in it. And I was thinking about Ford Kodiak Brown, which is basically the brown version of the Ford Tuxedo Black. And the brown looks black at night, but in the day, it looks like a really dark brown with gold flake in it. So I decided on the black, and that came out great. And I wanted to do Detroit Steels because I like the 60s Lincolns, and of course I watch Mob Steel.
Yep.
And I was going to paint them black, and my wife, again, she's like, no, that's too much black.
Yep.
I was like, well, what do you think? She was like, we're doing the same color as the interior.
I love it.
And so this friend of mine, Rick Scoggins, he's in Snellville, Georgia, and he powder coater. And I took my wheels out there and said, hey, man, can you match this color? And I took him a swatch.
Yep.
He was like, yeah, I think I got something like that. And I was like, can you put flake in it? He said, yeah. So
easy.
Yeah, easy. Yeah, it's like done. So it worked out, and I'm happy that my better 3/4 stepped in.
Oh yeah. I grew up riding. My dad had a '59 Apache pickup, kind of a truck that I remember. I have photos before I was a year old, kind of standing in front of it, and he did some work to it. And I always loved that truck, and he sold it in the early 90s. But there was a guy that had a red 59-ish Apache stepside, and he did the red wheels. So it was kind of like, I think it was like a patina paint, I think. And then he did the red wheels, and I always thought that was so awesome. Now, his were like a fire engine red, but they looked so good. And I want to give a shout-out to Detroit Steel Wheel Co. Most of us, know it as like Mob Steel Wheels. But when they did that division of their, organization, I love it because I tell you what, the wheels are so classy. You put those beauty rings on there and maybe a white wall tire like what you got, and dude, that's like putting some spices in a pot of spaghetti. It's like it's fire now. You know what I mean? It's good.
It is definitely garners a lot of attention, and people ask. Well, and it's funny because I go to Caffeine and Octane sometimes, or any car show, and if it's cloudy, it's but once the sun comes out and people see the flake in the wheel and the flake in the paint, and then it's like a light bulb goes off for them. It's like, wow, this is really nice. And honestly, I've had the car done now for, gosh, I guess about eight years, and it's still, it still blows me away the number of people that just ooh and ah over it, and I haven't never gotten used to it.
Yeah, and I would tell people very similar into the truck scene where the C10s like grew to this crazy level, and then everybody was always like, what's going to be the next thing? And like the Chevy OBS, the 88 to 98s are kind of referred to as, we all knew they were going to come back around, and now those have just exploded and blown up. I would encourage people. I love seeing these big boats, these land yachts, the 70s, and I do think like you can get these. To your point, you got a really good deal, but I see them out there, and I go, man. And you'll see some of them that were probably in a garage forever. It was grandma or grandpa's car, those type of scenarios. But when you start looking at the seat, like what's in Skaggs, and I mean, they are so plush. I mean, even stock, if you're going to static drop it, if you're going to bag it, or just even leave it stock. Like these cars, I think eventually in the next few years, they're going to come around, and people are going to realize, like, well, wow, I could do suicide doors like what Skip did. I could bag it, I could leave it stock, and they can really enjoy them, man.
Yeah, the guy that started our club, and he was actually friends with the guy that started Suicide Slabs, and
Psycho from Georgia.
Yep. And he was like, man, he's like these 70s, they aren't getting any love, and like you're saying, they're really reasonable, and you can find them, if you just put in a little bit of work. One that's most people look at it and say, it's too far gone. And it's not, and the parts are... I'll give you an example. When I first got mine, I had a hole in the fuel tank. I was like, oh, God, where am I going to find a fuel tank for this? Napa? Yeah. The same fuel tank that went in an F-150 or an F-100, back in the day.
Yeah.
It's the same tank. And a lot of this stuff, I mean, it's because they were parts bin cars. Outside of the body, everything else, the engines, the transmissions, they're all parts bin cars. So, I had no problem finding a starter relay or, alternators all day, just whatever.
Yeah.
So you can still fix them. You can still fix them up,
Yeah, and I think Chris, I got to ask Teresa from Lincoln Land. I think Chris Dunn from Lincoln Land, I believe he helped either build or put together or do some work on a couple of the cars that were in the American Gangster movie. So obviously,
Yeah.
that movie, telling that crazy story of the drug kingpin and stuff like that. But from that era, they have to have, to your point, some of the movie stuff. They have to have the era period correct vehicles, and of course, the '70s was huge for all that. But yeah, I mean, from gangsters to grandmas and grandpas or whoever. I mean, these cars could still be gotten for a reasonable price, and you'd be blown away sometimes seeing them for 40,000 miles. All original, and you get in it and it smells like a new car. It's crazy.
Yeah, mine had 60,000 miles on it when I got it.
Yeah,
and the back seat. The only detriment to my car was that it had been sitting out in the weather for so long that the vinyl was starting to crack and stuff like that. So I did redo the seats in leather, but I kept the same design, as far as the cushions and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, you see them, and they can be had and just brought back to life, and it's my only, I guess, the sad part about the '70s Lincolns is that a lot of guys grab these cars and they, I mean, derby racing is still a thing, and you can't kill these big cars.
Yeah.
And so a lot of guys snatch them up for demolition derby.
Yeah, because that's
the sad part.
Yeah, they're mastodons, almost like we said earlier, and apparently it blows my mind that the '60s Lincolns point, and there's a guy out in California, I know he's had a lot of dealings with that, where these guys will they buy him for that, and then they'll let him pick some parts off it and stuff, but it kind of blows my mind that the '60s Lincolns were apparently used for that for a certain extent. But yeah, when you start getting into these things, I mean, they're so big, and they're almost like what a lot of people have told me. When the '60s Lincolns were like 10, 15 years old, you start getting into the late '70s, and they're starting to hit about 15 years old. They were kind of like throwaway cars. You could buy them for $500-$800. And a lot of that was because, the gas prices, of course, and things like that. But I do think, the ones I've seen in person, they look cool, and, people can get them. So, but, when I think about your 79, we talked about, you got rear suicide doors, you got the smoothie wheels, Detroit Steel Wheel Co. It's bagged, you got some stereo in it. The interior looks fresh. Like you said, you kind of redid some of the seats. Is there anything next on it? Or do you go, hey, man, I'm very content, and I want to work on my bikes, or what's next for you?
I'm glad you brought that up, because I am chomping at the bit to put a 7.3 liter Godzilla in that car.
Really?
Yes. Now, if not in that, because my car, the 79s. If you look at the progression of the Continentals, because they kind of changed them up from the early '70s up until '74, then you had 75, it was 74 to 75, then 77, 78, and 79, they were pretty much the body style that you see that looks like mine. And just little variations, prior to 70, 77.
Yep.
So in 77, you 460, just, in all those cars, the 70s cars, all of them have 460 big blocks. And then 78, you could 460, or you had an option to you get a 400, you had an option to get a 460. Mm-hmm. 79, you can only get a 400. Mm-hmm. So mine has a 400. And if you're a Ford guy, the 400 and the 460 is basically, the 400 is not a big block, but it's not a small block either. It's kind of that in-between bastard child. Mm-hmm. And you could fit a C6 transmission behind it, but it's still, and 2-barrel carburetor, it's just anemic, basically.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I've been smitten by the Godzilla bug, man. It's
So you would do a motor swap, but keep it more period correct, not go, I'm going to do a Coyote or anything, because, I mean, dude, those things have huge engine bays, so you could be able to take that thing out and then finesse in a new one, man, pretty quick.
Yeah, and what's funny about if you research the Godzillas, they aren't that much different in size than a Coyote. Well, actually, they're narrower than a Coyote, because the Coyote got the dual overheads, but the Godzilla, it's an in-block camshaft, so It's
It's a beast.
yeah, and it'll pretty much fit into anything.
Yep.
So if I don't do it to Claudine, and that's the name of that's the
Okay,
name of my
cool.
Lincoln. If I don't do it to Claudine, it'll be in my next Lincoln, which I really want to find another Continental cheap, and I want to cut the top off.
Nice. So you want to do a roadster?
Yeah.
We had Detroit Deviant on. He's in the greater Orlando area. And I was looking back. It was ironic because I was looking back at photos today that he shared over the years in the Lincoln Forum. And, he is a very highly skilled, like, this guy does some crazy stuff. And he has like a 66, 67. And he basically made it a hard top, removable top. And if you go back and you look at some of his stuff, and he was doing a lot of stuff on YouTube, and I think he's kind of panned off a little bit. But, dude, like, his car from an engineering standpoint is going to be like just insane, and he's been working on it a long time, but it's always interesting to me, people that want to take on an advantageous, a big project like that, because it's not easy, but if that's something you want to do, man, by all means.
Well, these cars being body on frame, as far as, because a lot of times people think of, when you cut the top off,
Yep.
you got to deal with flex and whatever, blah blah blah, and sure, there is some structural in that, but there were actually, back in the 70s, there were companies that were cutting the tops off of 2-door and 4-door 70s Lincolns, and I think they were using the LTD convertible tops as part of the game. I mean, these were motorized convertible tops; they weren't just manual, So, I mean, you can cut the top off of them and not worry too much about the car just folding up on you.
Yep.
But actually, I've seen a couple that I'm kind of following now that the top's already been cut off, and I'm like, you know what? I can get it for the right price. Yeah, I think I might do that.
Yeah,
finish it up and throw the Skagg touch on it.
Yeah, you got to. What's ironic is when I was researching some stuff from the 70s, a year or two ago, I came across some old scanned ads from Playboy magazine back in the day, like in the 70s, and there was that company, to your point, I have it somewhere. It was a white Lincoln 70 style. It's called a 77, and it had been converted, and there was a company / a dealer, you could maybe work through the dealer to make it happen, but it might have been even dealer warranted, but they did the convertibles, and that was pretty cool. And when I was younger, I always thought, like, why aren't there more convertibles? And then as I got older, I kind of had read some stuff. I don't know all the back history, but it seemed like with the National Highway Transportation Safety Board, whatever, and all that stuff, there was something that had happened from a safety standpoint, and then they go, and there was an immediate decline from the OEMs, maybe the next year, where it was like they made 200, So the 60s era was quickly gone. Now, granted, yeah, you can go buy a BMW, and you can buy. My mother-in-law had a Jag. I think she has a Jag that's a little convertible, like a newer style one. So you can get them, but keep me honest, it was something to do with the safety and the way things were going at that time.
Yep, it was, and some of the U.S. manufacturers were afraid that they were going to ban convertibles in the U.S.
Insane.
Yeah, and I mean, and this is a time too where you start my car. I got these huge bumpers that sit way off from the grill, and they got the bumperettes on them because of all the highway
safety stuff.
The name.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, the National Highway Traffic Safety, whatever.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's why we have all the ugly bumpers that stick way out, and even the cars that were imported from Europe have all the big ugly rubber bumpers on them. Where you look at the European version, and they were just so sleek and cool looking,
Yeah. It is crazy to think, how things are kind of driven now. I'm for safety in a lot of ways. I mean, if you think about what was ironic, the 65 Lincoln I acquired from Robert, we're doing the research, and it was an option to have seat belts, right? I mean, especially in the back, but even in the front. And you think about safety, and you go, yeah, you don't want people flying out, and then there's insurance drives a lot of things, right? Because then there's life insurance if someone passes away, unfortunately, and all that. But to your point, when you think of the styling, I think back and say, man, if Lincoln could have somehow rolled out the new Continental in a way that had the coach doors, not with the special edition deal, the 80, and they could have
Right.
maybe even had a convertible some way, right? Do you think back 20 years ago-ish? Remember when the Chrysler 300C came out, and you talk about hip-hop
Mm-hmm.
videos and stuff? Everybody wanted one of those things. And you look at it now and you go, it's all right. But it kind of had that boxy, that Bentley kind of look, right, that front end.
Right.
And that sold
Right.
it, man. Imagine if Lincoln could have did that and had that buzz.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you remember all the different artist renditions of what the Lincoln should look like or floating around? It's like, oh
Yeah.
man, if they make it like this, great.
Yeah. And Detroit Deviant, believe it or not, he did one of my favorite ones. He did a cool little rendering, and man, I was like, wow, that's it, dude. I mean, that's a convertible version. Like that could have worked. But 15 years before that, they had the prototype, right? And it makes its rounds, and people see it. And I have some of the photos saved as well. And apparently, a couple of those made it out, and people bought them, and they're in their personal collections. But they weren't able to capture. And then, of course, they spent all the money retooling everything and rolling it out. And then they're like, oh, within a year or two, they're like, we're not making them anymore. The market shifted. Everybody wants SUVs. I'm thinking, as well as I did, they did all that research beforehand, and they were hoping
Right.
it was going to pop off. But, just at that price point and stuff, they're not going to attract, the younger buyers. And that's, that's what's leading a lot of the stuff these days,
I think so too. That Lincoln, and I grew up in Lincoln. And I'm kind of the guy that, like, I drive. You talking about Suburbans? I love Suburbans. My brother had one, and we're gonna bag that thing. And
Yeah.
but when it comes to the luxury cars, I'm more of a Lincoln than Cadillac kind of guy. But I think Lincoln really fell off or they missed the boat on their marketing, and they could take a lesson from Cadillac with what Cadillac did when they brought out the CTSs. And okay, we got a sport touring car. You have all the luxury, but it's going to haul ass, and you're going to be able to keep up with people on the Autobahn. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And a rebadged Taurus ain't going to do it,
Yeah.
and it's, now don't get me wrong. I think they broke the mold when Lincoln came out with the Navigator, even though it was an Expedition, but
Sure.
they started the market of the luxury SUVs. But when it comes to the cars, I think they just kind of fell off a little bit.
Yeah, they did. And I do think, to your point, I mean, we could definitely slice and dice it and go, the consumer market definitely drives, that, because you got people that go, do I want to spend $80,000 on one of these, whatever. But to your point, I think they still could have did it in a way that people were just like, wow, man, it has suicide doors. Like, maybe, you could, if you could have went in day one and bought one and go, hey, it's an extra $3,000 or whatever, and you can have it elongated, all that. But, yeah, we'll have to see what holds for the future. One of the things I did mention, I was looking back at some of my posts, I did find it was for the 70s Lincolns, I had posted, this is going back, 2019, and it says, did you know a dealer ad appeared in Playboy Mag in 1977? Fox Valley Lincoln Mercury had the exclusive distributorship of these Lincoln convertibles per Matt, the Lincoln Guys blog. Kind of went into this whole big thing, and uni classic cars. There were just a couple of resources that I had found out there, but you basically see there was an ad literally that was Fox Valley Lincoln Mercury in Aurora, Illinois, and the ad was classic, sporty, and rare, and it kind of had a little bunny kind of deal. It looked like, or a gator, as the logo. But yeah, I mean, you had a 70s Lincoln that was a convertible, and yeah, they're pretty cool.
And you could get the coupe or the sedan or the Continental. Yeah.
Yep.
And they look ugly as sin with the top up, but down, the top down. That's kind of one thing with the 60s Lincolns. They look good with the top up, but.
Yeah.
They look better with the top down, of course, because it's all hidden away. But the 70s cars, yeah, they look great because they're just so long, and just a nod to the 60s Lincolns.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
with the top up, they were ugly as sin.
Well said. Well, dude, Skag, man, it's been cool. Like, we talked about all kinds of cool stuff. I mean, where you kind of grew up in the Georgia area, obviously the Lincoln connection, but some of the other stuff that you and I share common interests with, some of the hip hop, and I love, checking out your channel, and I would encourage people, Skaggs with an apostrophe S, SK, AGGS Garage. There's a video on there how this car makes money. That was one he did a couple months ago. 8 tips for putting your car out there and things like that. Man, is there anything else that you would want to share or anything that we maybe missed, Skip?
No, I appreciate you having me on, and you can find Skaggs with or without the apostrophe.
Okay, cool.
Because my wife's a guru.
Yeah. She put those little hashtag and keywords. And we would also want to reinforce that when you go to the channel, you can click on, I'm looking at it now, Shop Skaggs. And when you click on that, it takes you over to the Creative Bubble site. And you can pick up cool things like T-shirts and different mugs, the Evil Abe custom tumbler. I'm thinking about getting me one of those. So you got a lot of cool stuff going on, man.
Everybody look. When my wife did Evil Abe, I was like, put that on my wall.
Yeah.
I want a shirt.
I want a sticker.
And when I go to shows, people look like, where'd you get that shirt? And I mean, it's just so, because a lot of people don't even know that Lincoln is named after Abraham Lincoln, the Lincoln motor car. And trust me, I'm taking a whole bunch of those to Detroit when I go. Are you going to the 100 year?
I don't know that I'm going to go. I'll be honest. I know that they've done some things throughout the country, like some different things. But when is the event you're going to?
It's in
August.
August, I think. Yeah, it's in August.
So it'll be kind of maybe tied up to the Woodward Dream Cruise because I know Mob Steel's maybe posted about some stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. And normally I drive my car. I drive it. I mean, my wife's from North Carolina. We go to North Carolina. We go all over Georgia. It's been to Florida. But I think I'm a trailer it up there because the roads are just so crazy.
Yeah, I've been there. I went to the Woodward Dream Cruise years ago when we went up to Indianapolis for Indy Truck Bash, and then we kind of went to Woodward first, and I didn't get to experience it all. But man, that would be cool. And I'll have to look it up. I don't want to say for sure, but I do think I've seen Mob Steel comment about that. And that would be super cool, man. I'm glad to see, although I take my fair share little digs at Lincoln, I do appreciate them embracing with some of the little videos they've released and some of the throwback photos. I really appreciate them for that.
Yeah, but that's it's kind of what I'm doing this summer, and I, like I said, I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, ask your wife Michelle. I'm a sticker junkie like a lot of I'm sure the listeners, and I'd love to buy some of those stickers if they were available. So, if they're out there and I'm missing them, let me know. But, man, if you guys did the Evil Abe sticker, dude, sign me up. I'll buy a sticker pack for sure. You know what I mean?
I will do it. I'll do it.
Good stuff.
And trying to keep the 70s Lincolns, put them at the head of the game, trying to beat out the 60s Lincoln guys. So
yeah, for
It'll
sure.
It'll never happen, but, I can dream.
Yeah, for sure. And go check out some of his recent videos. AccuAir, we partner with them over on Our Lifestyle Podcast. I'm a big supporter of their brand. He's been going through kind of some things, fine-tuning stuff. So go check out some of his videos, and you'll get a chance to see the world of Skagg. And, dude, thank you so much, man. And I can't wait to link up, maybe if it's at a Coffee and Octane or maybe even at this other event up in August. Looking forward to getting a chance to meet you in person, dude. But keep doing what you do. Ride low, man, and to keep living that Lincoln life.
Will do. Thank you, man. Can't wait to shake your hand.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate you, man.
Thank you, man.